Hey there, and welcome to my channel. I'm Ashley Willingham, a sinner saved by grace, and an author of clean Christian fantasy romance books filled with adult characters, action, adventure, on-page prayer, and God's truths. You're listening to the free serialized audiobook for Ink and Ivy, my cozy Christian fantasy romance, Book One in the Gracehaven series. Don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless and enjoy.
Chapter 9. The morning sun filtered through the arched, stained glass windows of Gracehaven Church, casting colourful, dancing prisms across the polished wooden pews. Sitting sandwiched between Marigold and Bastian Hayes, Ivy tried her absolute best to listen to Pastor Amos's sermon. Truly, she did. But unbidden, her gaze wandered again, drifting straight across the church to where Mr. Vael and Elodie sat with Grandma Evelyn and her grandson Felix, flanked by Mayor Halloway, Mrs. Halloway, and Daphne. Felix, Gracehaven's human postmaster, provided a surprising splash of colour amongst the sea of brunettes, given his shock of auburn hair. Yet she barely took note of him. Instead, her eyes were all for the elven man, sitting as if carved from marble, his own gaze perfectly fixed upon the pulpit. Dressed today in a severe but impeccably tailored slate-grey coat, the crisp, stark white of his cravat stood in sharp contrast to the spilled ink of his braided hair. He looked utterly untouchable and entirely out of place. A warm weight leaned toward her, and a voice murmured just beyond her ear,
"Someone isn't paying attention."
Ivy jolted, her shoulder bumping against the solid wall of Bastian's arm. Snapping her gaze away from the opposite side of the church, she glared up at the dragon shifter with a scowl. Bastian offered her a thoroughly unrepentant grin in reply. With his warm bronze skin, his black hair styled in perpetually tousled waves, and those brown eyes of his that seemed to practically glow whenever he smiled, the blacksmith cut a striking figure in his Sunday best. But not nearly as striking as Mr. Vael, a ridiculous part of her mind whispered. "I'm paying perfect attention," she softly claimed, digging her elbow sharply into Bastian's ribs. He chuckled, clearly unfazed by her meagre physical assault, and turned his attention back to Pastor Amos. Ivy faced forward again, blowing out a quiet, frustrated breath. An aging centaur, wearing a simple brown robe draped over his dappled grey coat, Pastor Amos stepped to the edge of the dais once more, his soothing voice rising and falling in the midst of his sermon. Again, she tried to focus on the words, until a prickle at the base of her neck made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Unable to resist the invisible pull of eyes now resting upon her, she flicked a quick glance back across the aisle. Mr. Vael was no longer looking at the pulpit. His head was turned, his diamond blue eyes staring straight through the congregation at her. His brow furrowed as he flicked Bastian a glance as well. A deep frown pulled at the corners of his sculpted lips. For a moment he almost looked worried. But then he caught her watching him in turn. His gaze locked fully with hers. The moment it did, his features smoothed into a frigid, unreadable mask once more. Ivy whipped her head back around, facing forward so fast her neck twinged, just as Pastor Amos called out through the congregation.
Let us all stand and sing one final hymn as we hold in our hearts this reminder from Philippians chapter 4. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
Heat bloomed in her cheeks, even as the pastor's words settled deep in her soul, as if he had uttered them just for her. Do not be anxious about anything. She desperately needed that reminder, especially with the dreaded dinner at the wisteria looming over her that very evening. Tonight, she would have to speak with him. But not only that, she would have to apologize to him for her poor behavior. It was the Christian thing to do. He had been unkind to her first, yes. But two wrongs did not make a right. When the notes of their final hymn finally faded from the air, the heavy oak doors of the church were propped wide open, and the congregation spilled out into the bright spring sunshine. Ivy trailed in Bastian's wake alongside Marigold as they made for the door together, arm in arm, letting the dragon shifter carve a path through the milling crowd on their behalf. "Thank you for saving our seats again today, Bastian," she murmured under her breath as they walked. The very same words she had been uttering to him every Sunday for the past few years, as if it had become a strange ritual of sorts. "I'm sorry we were late, again." He chuckled, shooting her a quick glance over his shoulder.
You're always late these days, Ivy.
She winced at the reminder. She had always been scattered, it was true, but it seemed like the older she grew, the worse her scatteredness became. All around them, the hum of conversation and cheerful greetings rose and fell as they stepped out onto the stone landing, carefully navigating through the sea of their friends and neighbours. Breathing in the crisp morning air, Marigold sighed. "What a lovely sermon this morning."
Yes, for those of us who were listening.
Bastian teased, tossing another glowing smile her way. Ivy scowled again, her cheeks warming. "I was listening, thank you." But he was right about that, too. Already, Pastor Amos's sermon was fading from her mind, like wisps of smoke caught on the breeze. Next week, she would bring a notebook and take notes. Blessedly, Marigold changed the subject. "Are you coming for lunch, Bastian? We're having Daphne and Felix by as well." The dragon shifter grinned.
Of course. You know I can never turn down your cooking, Mari.
As they descended the stone staircase leading to the walkway, Bastian stepped down first, turning to offer his hand to Marigold, and then Ivy, helping them navigate the steep stone steps. Accepting his aid with a grateful smile, she hopped down onto the cobblestone path. But the moment her boots hit the stone, the hairs on her arms stood on end once more. Again, the heavy, undeniable press of eyes burned against her back. The scent of ink mingled with dark chocolate suddenly enveloped her senses.
Miss Fairwood.
A smooth baritone rumbled just behind her. "Mr. Vael." Breath catching in her throat, she whipped around to face him. Standing on the step just above her was the elven man in question, his ice-blue eyes dropping to where her hand still lingered in the clasp of Bastian's, before his attention snapped back up to her face, gaze locking with hers. For a moment, she could only stare as the world briefly fell away. Silver. Why had she not noticed before that his eyes were flecked with silver? Like captured starlight.
Ivy.
Bastian's voice floated toward her from far away. She blinked, and the world came rushing back in. The conversation of all those around her. The spring breeze teasing through her unbound hair. The fact that she was standing in the centre of the walkway, completely blocking Mr. Vail's path. To say nothing of the fact that she was still clinging to poor Bastian's hand. Twitching away from the blacksmith, she hastily stepped aside. "Pardon me, Mr. Vail," she managed, her cheeks flaring with further heat. But still, Mr. Vail did not immediately move. His icy eyes lingered upon her flushed face for a second longer. Then he tipped his head, first to her, and then to Marigold.
Miss Dawn.
"Mr. Vail," Marigold softly greeted. When his gaze slid to Bastian, though, the temperature between the two men seemed to physically warp. A chill danced through the air, sending Ivy shivering as Mr. Vail stood there, simply staring at the blacksmith, waiting. In contrast to the elf's frosty manners, Bastian offered up one of his easy smiles.
Bastian Hayes, sir, at your service. Caelen Vael.
The elven man coolly introduced himself in turn.
Pleasure.
Despite his words, he sounded decidedly not pleased. So much so, in fact, that he completely forgot to introduce little Elodie, trailing happily in his wake in her matching grey silk frock. "Hello, Miss Ivy. Miss Marigold," the girl called out in passing. Without another word, Mr. Vail took his daughter's hand and swept past them all, his long strides carrying him swiftly down the path and out onto the street at a brisk clip. Frowning to herself, Ivy's gaze followed his retreating back for a moment. What could they possibly have done to offend him now? Before she could mull the matter further, Daphne and Felix at last appeared, arm in arm.
"What's for lunch, then?"
Felix asked with a good-natured smile.
"I'm starving."
At the sight of the postmaster, a spark of hope ignited in Ivy's heart. She swung her attention toward him, her lips parting with the urgent question that had been eating at her all weekend. Before she could even utter a single syllable, though, Felix's smile withered away. Holding up a hand, he shook his head and insisted,
"And no, I don't know who this mysterious Fern is."
She blinked, recoiling slightly from the sheer exasperation in his tone. Daphne ducked her head, her tufted ears flattening against her curls. "I've already been pestering him all weekend about it, I'm afraid," she sheepishly murmured. Bastian raised his eyebrows, falling into step beside them as the group finally set off down the path and veered toward Main Street, making for the bakery.
"What's this about a fern?"
"Nothing," Ivy hastily hedged. But no sooner had she uttered such a thing than Marigold quietly announced, "Ivy is corresponding with a secret admirer." Pressing her lips into a thin line, she shot her best friend a withering look. "I have had exactly one mysterious letter from a gentleman claiming his name is Fern. That is it. It is hardly a correspondence." She forced out a laugh, as if this were all a great lark. As if she weren't desperately wishing Fern might write to her again. As if her pulse didn't quicken at the very idea that she might have an admirer at last. Bastian slowed his pace, humming thoughtfully at this news. Suddenly, Daphne gasped. "It's not you, is it, Bas?" The dragon shifter recoiled, his face twisted in an expression of horror. A horror mirrored in her own heart at the thought of Bastian Hayes being Fern.
"What?"
he choked out. "Please," Ivy scoffed. "Bastian is like a brother to me." Further up the street, she caught a brief glimpse of slate grey as Mr. Vael disappeared inside the corner shop, pulling the front door shut behind him with a sharp snap that echoed through the peaceful morning. Even from this distance, she could read the new store name freshly painted across the front windows in a sweeping, elegant script. Vail's Vellum. She stared at the lettering as they walked, her brow furrowing. There was something vaguely, hauntingly familiar about that looping, precise handwriting. A sudden wild thought seized her. Could he be Fern? She tried to picture it. The delicate strawberry cake. The kind, encouraging words in the letter. Calling himself a bird-witted man. She nearly snorted out loud. Absolutely not. The idea of Mr. Vail being her secret admirer was even more absurd than Torrin Croft sneaking out of the woods to bring her a cake with strawberries arranged into a heart on top. The sound of Bastian's nervous laughter drew her attention back to the group.
"I mean absolutely no offence meant to you, Ivy. You're wonderful. I adore you. Like a sister."
He dragged his fingers through his already tousled hair, mussing it further.
"But no, this Fern is definitely not me."
Felix cleared his throat.
"Right then. Well, now that bit of awkwardness is out of the way. Did we ever decide what's for lunch?"
Chapter 10. Ivy scraped her spoon against the bottom of her bowl, determined not to leave a single bite behind. Sunday lunch at the Honeybloom Bake Shop was always a delightful affair. Just her, Marigold, and their closest friends, enjoying a delicious meal together while the doors were closed to the public for the day. This Sunday, Marigold had outdone herself, serving up thick-cut, toasted sourdough sandwiches piled high with tender, herb-roasted chicken, crisp arugula, and a generous slather of sharp mustard, accompanied by roasted carrots and parsnips. And then there was dessert. Ivy closed her eyes and relished the final bite of warm peach crisp, letting the buttery brown sugar crumble melt on her tongue, giving way to a rich pool of vanilla cream. Bastian sighed, threading his hands over his stomach and leaning back in his chair.
"It's a wonder no man has yet proposed to our dear Mari, on the simple merit that she's the best cook in all of Gracehaven."
Felix hummed his agreement, earning a playful swat on the arm from Daphne. "Oh, hush, you two," Marigold murmured, though her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A fleeting, wistful shadow dimmed the usual bright warmth of her golden eyes. Ivy frowned, her attention snagging on her best friend's features. A sudden soft shk sounded near the front of the shop, the distinct noise of thick paper sliding across the polished floorboards. Curious, her gaze snapped toward the front door. Lying there on the floor, stark against the wood, was a parchment envelope sealed with a thick dollop of crimson wax stamped with the image of a fern leaf. Fern. She swallowed down her gasp of surprise, just as Marigold turned her head and clearly spotted it too. "Fern has struck again!" the Sun Fae exclaimed, her gossamer wings fluttering wildly, her moment of brief wistfulness already forgotten. Bastian sat up straighter, squinting toward the door.
What?
Suddenly, the cosy languor of their Sunday lunch vanished. In a chaotic scrape of chairs, all 5 of them leapt to their feet at once. "I've got it!" Marigold exclaimed, making a dash for the letter. Daphne clapped her hands, cheering Mary on. But as her best friend raced toward her letter, a hot spike of some strange emotion flared in Ivy's chest. Ever since her parents' death, she had never had anything that was simply hers. But this most certainly was. Throwing herself across the room, she snatched up the envelope before Marigold's hand could even brush against it. "It's my letter, Mary," she breathed, clutching the missive against her chest. "And I'd rather you not read it." At her admonishment, the light vanished from Marigold's eyes, instantly replaced by a muted sorrow. The Sun Fae took a swift step back. "Oh, of course, Ivy. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to pry. I was just curious if he had put his true name on it this time." Pinning a weak smile to her lips, Marigold finished. "But you're absolutely right. It's your letter." Felix hurried past them both and wrenched the door open. Stepping out onto the sidewalk, he craned his neck to look both ways down the street. Ivy froze, her eyes still fixed on Murray, unable to bring herself to ask the all-important question.
"Well?"
Bastian asked on her behalf.
"Who was it?"
Felix stepped back inside and shut the door behind him, his brow furrowed.
"I don't see anyone suspicious. Just a family of halflings passing by the tailor's shop."
"It must be Soren then," Daphne reasoned. "Only a Skyfae could have flown away so quickly after slipping the letter under the door." Ivy made a face. "Soren? Never." Felix shook his head.
"Nonsense,"
he murmured in agreement with her own conclusion. His expression turned momentarily pained.
"Soren is still mad for my cousin, Sophie. He always has been."
The conversation continued around her, the words all blurring together as she lowered her attention toward the envelope clasped in her hands. She stroked her thumb against it, luxuriating in the texture of the fine weave. Fern. He had written her another letter, and so soon after the first, too. Taking advantage of the group's distraction, she retreated, pressing her back firmly against the wall so that no one could read over her shoulder. With trembling fingers, she cracked the wax seal and slid out the folded letter, swiftly devouring the elegant, looping script.
"Dear Miss Ivy, please forgive my forwardness in writing to you so informally once more and in so clandestine a manner. I almost could not bring myself to write this missive, such is my concern for your reputation. I would not wish anyone to think ill of you on account of me. No doubt I should merely approach you in person and make my intentions known. That is what any true gentleman would do. And yet I find myself rendered a coward at the thought, even as I sit down to pen this letter on Saturday evening, knowing full well I will see you tomorrow morning. I already know my nerve will fail me on the morrow. Perhaps it is mere pride, or perhaps I fear your rejection. I do not yet know. But whatever the case, I will make my intentions toward you known on paper, at least. I wish to correspond with you, for the purposes of coming to know you better. Though I know I have been half too bold to have admitted such to you already, I will say it again all the same. I find you to be a most intriguing woman. Truly, you are unlike any other woman I have ever met before. If you are amenable, please simply leave your letters addressed to Fern at the post office. I will make arrangements to ensure they are delivered into my hands and mine alone. I await your reply with the utmost foolish hope, though I am far too old to entertain such follies. But I will also respect your silence and never write to you again, should silence be the response you choose. For no doubt you must think me a man of few manners, and no care at all for proper etiquette, given all that I have already confessed in the course of these letters. Respectfully, Fern.
The breath rushed from her lungs as she let her head thump against the wall behind her. Her heart raced, threatening to run away with her. A correspondence. A man who thought she was most intriguing wanted to engage her in a correspondence. Eagerly tilting her face back toward the page, she read the letter a second time, and then a third, smiling like a fool all the while, until her eyes snagged on one line in particular. Knowing full well I will see you tomorrow morning. She frowned, chewing on the inside of her cheek. He was at church this morning? But of course he would be. Fern quoted scripture. Men who quoted scripture attended church. But who was he? Her thoughts whirred, tumbling over one another as she tried to recall the exact layout of the church that morning, where everyone had been sitting in the pews. She failed. All she could remember was that Mr. Vael was there, sitting with the mayor. And how had the letter arrived here just now without anyone spotting him? Perhaps he could fly. Was he a sky fae? But not Soren, never Soren. But what if Soren has finally given up on poor Sophie? Marigold abruptly murmured, as if in reply to her musings. The quiet sound of her friend's voice pulled her from her daze and back into the ongoing debate over the identity of her admirer. Admirer? Yes, she would allow herself to think of him as such now. At least he admired her enough to wish to know her better. Mary added on a mere breath. Who knows if the portals to Earth will ever open again? Her friend winced as if afraid the very walls might overhear her and judge her for saying such a pessimistic thing.
No.
Bastian rumbled. Ivy's attention darted toward the dragon shifter. There he stood by the table, his eyes gazing at nothing in particular. And yet, for the briefest of moments, pain flashed across his features, as if a sudden, unpleasant memory had just clawed its way to the surface of his mind. Though she refused to pry into Bastian's personal affairs, still Ivy's heart ached for him, for whatever private pain he must be carrying. None of them knew much about what his life had been like before he had arrived in Gracehaven some 7 years ago. He never spoke about it. All they knew was that he was originally from Silver Peak, far off in the northern mountains.
No, he won't have given up on her,
Bastian softly insisted, the words laced with muted grief.
Not if he's already waited for her all this time.
Silence blanketed the room. For a single second, no one moved. But then the moment passed. Felix cleared his throat.
Well, who else are our suspects?
I'm honestly all out of ideas, Ivy sighed, even as her heart fluttered with excitement. She had a mysterious admirer, someone who had been admiring her from afar, who found her intriguing, who wanted to come to know her better. And she couldn't wait to fetch some parchment and ink and write back to him at last. Perhaps his next letter might be more revealing. Perhaps she might soon discover just who he was. It must be Mr. Torrin then, Daphne exclaimed, stamping one of her hooves against the floorboards. Who else could it be? She ticked off on her fingers. He's mysterious. He never talks to anyone except Sir Charles, so no doubt he would write a letter rather than pursue Ivy in person. And he lives in the forest, surrounded by ferns. It's so terribly obvious when we think about it. Please, Daphne, Marigold cut in, her tone uncharacteristically sharp. Let's not make a jest of Mr. Croft. He is a quiet man, and he no doubt suffered greatly in the war. We should not now amuse ourselves at his expense. They all startled at the sun-phase tone. Wings flattening against her back, Marigold murmured a hasty, "Excuse me," before she hurried back to the table and gathered up the empty dessert bowls with a great clattering of porcelain and clanging spoons. Without another word, her best friend fled into the kitchen, disappearing from view. Ivy frowned, watching the swinging door settle. What in Luminara had gotten into her? She pushed herself away from the wall, making to follow, to ensure Marigold was all right when the sudden chiming of the front bell jerked her attention back that way. The door swung open, forcing Daphne and Felix to hastily step out of the way as Mr. Whitfield practically tumbled inside. For once, the Fable Rabbit was not wearing his usual immaculate tweed. Instead, he was in his shirt sleeves, his whiskers twitching wildly.
"Oh, Miss Ivy, there you are,"
the tailor gasped, out of breath.
"I do so hate to impose on a Sunday, but might you be able to pay a visit? Abigail has come down with a terrible cough. It has the missus all worried, you know."
In an instant, everything else melted away. Her worry for Marigold, her flush of excitement over another letter from Fern. Everything vanished, save for the promise of work waiting to be done. She would have to check on Marigold after. "You aren't imposing in the slightest, Mr. Whitfield," Ivy promised, tucking the latest letter into her dress pocket and moving toward the stairs. "I will be right there, just as soon as I fetch my things." Chapter 11. The bell above the door clamoured wildly as Ivy hurried inside the tailor shop, practically stepping on Mr. Whitfield's heels in her haste. The front of the store was filled with towering shelves, neatly stacked with bolts of airy white muslin, embroidered cotton, rich jewel-toned silks, and sturdy worsted wools. Half-draped dress forms stood in the corners, showcasing the latest styles from the capital, while the glass counters gleamed with neatly arranged spools of ribbon and cards of intricate lace. Again, she recalled that she still had to order a dress for Daphne's engagement party. Why did she always remember items from her to-do list at the most inopportune times? Following Mr. Whitfield further, she bypassed the fitting rooms and darted through a velvet curtain at the back of the shop, ascending a remarkably narrow set of wooden stairs. As they climbed toward the family's private living quarters, the architecture slowly shifted. Bit by bit, the ceiling dropped by a few vital inches until Ivy was forced to duck her head. Lumbering along like a giant trying to navigate a dollhouse, she squeezed through the cramped doorframe and finally stepped into the Whitfield residence. Warm light spilled from small frosted glass lamps, illuminating braided oval rugs in shades of rose and cream. Miniature wingback chairs sat neatly arranged around a hearth that smelled pleasantly of dried lavender, while heavily laden bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Practically hopping with impatience, Mr. Whitfield led her down a short hallway and turned into the second doorway on the left, straight into a tidy bedroom clearly made to house 2 of their 4 daughters, though only one was present at the moment. And there, lying amidst a sea of pillows, was Abigail, a sweet-tempered Fable Rabbit of an age with little Elodie. Mrs. Whitfield sat perched on a small stool beside the bed, gently stroking her daughter's fawn-coloured paw all the while. "Good day, Mrs. Whitfield," Ivy greeted as she stepped inside the room and carefully set her leather satchel down on the low trunk at the foot of the bed. "How are you feeling, Abigail?" "I'm perfectly all right, Miss Ivy," Abigail insisted, offering up a brave, wobbly smile. But the moment the girl drew breath to say anything more, a deep, rattling cough seized her frame and left her gasping for air. "Do not over-exert yourself, darling," Mrs. Whitfield fretted, her long ears drooping with worry.
"Is there anything that can be done, Miss Ivy?"
Mr. Whitfield asked, his nose twitching. "Of course," Ivy reassured him with a small smile. "The Lord willing, we'll have Miss Abigail set to rights in no time." Unbuckling her satchel, she quickly sorted through the neat rows of clinking glass vials until she found exactly what she needed, a bottle of dark amber syrup. A tincture she had brewed herself just last week, a blend of horehound and thyme, steeped in local raw honey, mixed with a generous measure of slippery elm. Mr. Whitfield moved to join his wife at the bedside, resting a comforting paw on her shoulder.
"How grateful we are for you, Miss Ivy. What luck that we have the finest herbalist in the countryside living right across the street.
Truly, Mrs. Whitfield agreed, her dark eyes shining. We are very blessed to have you so near. Ivy's hands went entirely still. The earnest weight of their gratitude struck her squarely in the chest, pressing against the lingering bruise the loss of the corner shop had left there. Living right across the street, she still needed her own shop, her own home, a place where she could no longer be a burden on anyone at all. But her heart lurched as she pursued that thought to its natural conclusion. If she had to purchase an empty plot of land on the outskirts of Gracehaven to build an apothecary from scratch, she wouldn't be right across the street from the Whitfields anymore. She wouldn't be in the heart of town where her friends and neighbours needed an apothecary most. A fresh wave of annoyance toward Mr. Vael flared, sending her jaw clenching. The man had bought the one empty storefront in Gracehaven just to sell paper, and now she would have to change all her carefully laid plans. "Miss Ivy?" Mrs. Whitfield pressed, her brow furrowing. "Is something amiss?" "No," she blurted out, blinking herself back to the present, to the trio of fable rabbits watching her with matching worried expressions. She had a job to do. Forcing her jaw to unclench so she could offer them all a quick smile, she explained, "I'm going to give Abigail a dose of syrup right now and then be back by tomorrow to see if there's been any improvement." Mr. Whitfield bobbed his head.
Of course. Come by any time that suits.
Focusing on the task at hand, Ivy poured a careful measure of the herbal syrup into a small wooden spoon and stepped forward to offer it to Abigail. As she worked, a sense of determination settled back over her heart, momentarily chasing away the shadows left by Mr. Vail's arrival in town. There was no use in moping about the corner shop any longer. She would simply have to figure out a new plan from here.
Thank you again, Miss Ivy. We are in your debt.
Mr. Whitfield called out from the top of the stairs, his voice echoing through the tailor shop as she raced toward the door, eager to go and check on Marigold at last. And selfishly, to finally pen her first letter to Fern. "Of course, Mr. Whitfield," Ivy called back over her shoulder. Wrenching the front door open, she hurried out onto the sun-drenched porch, while still shouting to the fable rabbit through the swiftly closing door. "I'll be back by tomorrow to check on—" The rest of her words caught in her throat as she stepped out into the street and slammed bodily into something solid. Something warm. Something smelling undeniably of fresh ink and rich dark chocolate.